Welcome to Lift Your Legacy. My name is Jacob Rupp, father, husband, and rabbi. And each week we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unlock your inner potential and create change that will impact the future. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am honored to have Rabbi Yitzchok Adlerstein, who is the Director of Interfaith Affairs at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and an author and founder of the widely distributed, widely read Cross Currents magazine that deals with all kinds of difficult and controversial ethics and concepts that are going on in the Jewish world today. He is also a professor at many law schools, well-known lecturer and writer, and in general, one of the people that really contributes to the way that modern Jews think about their lives and their world. And we go through quite a few different, very important fundamentals about how do you analyze your relationship with your community, how do you do the best you can do, and how do you learn to embrace openness while at the same time have a backbone. So with no further ado, I am honored to have Rabbi Yitzchok Adlerstein. So how did you get started in Los Angeles? Were you born there? Grew up there?
Oh no, I don't even play volleyball. I come from the cradle of Jewish civilization, as I tell my evangelical friends all the time. Tell them that, the story in the Bible about God speaking to Abraham and telling him to leave his ancestral abode and go to the place that he was going to select for him. And tell him, we have a rabbinic tradition that when that happened, God was speaking to Abraham in Brooklyn. And half of the time they actually believe it. Now, I'm not from Brooklyn. I'm actually purebred Manhattan.
Wow.
From Manhattan, like most other Jews around the world, and lived there through marriage and kollel. And when the money ran out, started looking for jobs and wound up in Los Angeles, where life is comfortable.
What were you doing in LA?
I came out for a new academic institution called Yeshiva of Los Angeles. I was a Maggid. I was basically a Torah teacher. That is my first and second and third love in life, teaching Torah.
Who are some of you? Sorry, go ahead.
In the course of several years, the program that was started kind of fizzled. Yeshiva of Los Angeles became more Yeshiva of University of Los Angeles high schools, and the base medrash pretty much disappeared. I wound up continuing outreach, which was my first professional love and had been doing even before I left New York. But after a while, that also kind of changed. And at one point in my life, without really any warning, I was picked up by our sister institution, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and basically told, Adlerstein, we got good news for you and bad news. The good news is you still have a job. Bad news is you're not working for us. So although it was something that I had never envisioned and never saw myself doing, probably because they did have a big mouth, something that I knew for quite a while before, I was invited in to join the Simon Wiesenthal Center as part of their advocacy staff, I guess is the way you would look at it. And in time, I became the Director of Interfaith Affairs for the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is the largest Jewish membership group in North America.
So if we could go back a little bit, who were some of your early influences that pushed you and gave you that drive for advocacy, for Jewish outreach, for education?
Yeah, and it's interesting. What's the common denominator of all of them? Time's up. I would say it's responsibility. It's achrayus, having a sense of you're here for a purpose. God put you here for a mission. Figure out what that mission is and go for it. And all the parts of the puzzle that you mentioned are all part of the same thing, whether it's teaching Torah, doing outreach, or working as an advocate for the interests of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. So to answer your question, who were the influences? They were varied. I attribute a lot of the sense of responsibility to Mori Varabi, the Rosh Hashiva of Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim, Rav Henoch Leibowitz Zatzal. While I was in yeshiva, I was close with two other amazing people who really shaped me intellectually. One was Rav Nachman Bullman Zatzal, who from behind the scenes is probably responsible for more of the people that some people would call the leaders or the people who are out there of the present generation than anybody else. And I was also privileged for 10 years to be very, very close with the Varya Kaplan Zatzal. So between these three figures, my mind was sort of open to machshava, to Jewish thought, to Jewish philosophy. I got into some of the svarim, some of the works that I think made me somewhat successful in chinuch, in teaching Torah, particularly Maharal, later on Slonim. And the rest is history. LA is a wonderful place. It's laid back. You don't have to worry so much. And hey, what's my neighbor going to say? I can get away with things, and to get away with things in Los Angeles, I could never have done in New York. And I figured that was part of the reason why Kadosh Baruch Hu sent me there. So
when you say get away with certain things, you mean certain styles of teaching or certain ways of engaging the public, or what specifically do you think was an opportunity?
Mostly the latter, having a varied set of interests within a Torah framework. Some of the things that I did in California, which I'm proud of doing, but requires some explanation to people who are not used to it. The sheer amount of involvement I have with non-Jewish communities, non-Jewish faith communities, was something new even for me. But the fact that I had a foundation of hashkafa from some real giants in the Torah world, and maintained contact with some very, very important people in the Torah world to this day, gave me the confidence to go ahead and proceed. There would have been a lot more criticism in New York, and have to worry about how is your daughter ever going to find the shidduch. I remember one time speaking to the Novominsker Rebbe Shlita about a particular program, whether I should participate or not. And he said, I don't see anything wrong with it, but you're going to have to live with the people in your community. So I said, Rebbe, I have 8 children, Kanai Nahara. 7 of them are boys. 1 is a girl, and she's already married. Rebbe, I can do whatever I want. Now, I don't do whatever I want. I do subjugate myself to what I still proudly call Das Torah and Torah authority. But I did have more latitude than if I would have lived in Borough Park.
For a person that's looking to make the impact and have these kind of opportunities that are coming up, what kind of advice would you give someone that does want to, I don't want to call it unconventional, but like what you're saying with your work of working with the non-Jewish communities, for example, as a major focus of what you do, what kind of advice would you give someone looking to go into that kind of leadership?
Well, some of it is predictable. The first is that you have to be well-grounded in Torah, and you have to maintain contact with Torah people of substance. Otherwise, you either wind up to be an irresponsible loose cannon, or you make lots and lots and lots of mistakes. So you have to know what you're coming home to. You're coming home to a Torah community that's solid, but one that gives you enough latitude. Now, this is where a lot of people kind of make a mistake, and where I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided just in the nick of time to invent the internet. There are lots and lots and lots of people who take the attitude that you just hinted at of there got to be something more to this lifestyle than the things that I'm doing, which are meaningful and terrific, and they present the foundation of my family and my community. But Torah goes beyond that, and I feel within myself the need to do something more. A lot of people who feel kind of restricted and stymied in the Torah world think that they're the only ones on the face of the earth. That is wrong for two reasons. A, you're not. There are lots and lots and lots of people who are sort of living between communities. Sort of they have the fierce dedication to Torah learning, to halacha of everyone in the Haredi world, while at the same time appreciate openness, appreciate the creativity of the modern Orthodox world. And they're living literally between them. And they think that they're the only ones, but they're not. There are thousands, tens of thousands of people like that. And that's one of the reasons why I began Cross Currents, really to talk to people who are sort of in between the two worlds and just let them know that you're not alone. There are lots of others out there. So that's part of it. The second half of it is, if I had to pick one piece that I think I'm the proudest of all the pieces I've written for Cross Currents, I don't think anybody even remembers the piece, but I remember it, and I point to it all the time. It occurred to me once that there was a major difference between sports fans in South America and the US. It was a week where a number of people had been killed horribly in stampedes in soccer stadiums. Now, you know, we can take our NFL championships pretty seriously as well, but you don't find people getting trampled in the parking lot. And I argued that the difference is that a sports team is good for entertainment. For some people, it goes further than that. It's something you identify with, but you really get in trouble when you over-identify. And in the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't ask us what team we're on or what colors we're wearing, but how good we were at being Ovdei Hashem. Most people, with some exceptions, can't do it alone. So you need a community, you need a group. But the problem is when you over-identify with that group, when you feel that everything that group is calling upon you to do has to be practiced and even understood and defended, then you wind up not so true to yourself. You wind up defending the indefensible. You wind up with robots sometimes. You wind up with stasis in the community. So I argued for finding community, finding group, but avoiding the problem of over-identifying. I like quoting an old friend of mine. You know, he's not a frum Jew, but he's done a lot of good for Jews. That's Dennis Prager. I've been personally friendly with for a long time. He has a great line that he's used for decades, which is, I don't care which brand of Judaism you identify with, as long as you're ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed to be a Haredi Jew, but I would be ashamed of it if I would have to defend everything that goes on in the community in the name of what some of my friends and neighbors think is proper. You have to be true enough to yourself to recognize what things are defensible, what things are good for you, and what things you're just gonna have to break away just a little bit because your particular kids have different needs.
That's such a fundamental and important ideology that I would love to develop a little bit more with you. One of the major challenges that a lot of Bali Tshuva have is when you enter into the world of Torah, so many concepts are coming down from your rabbi, from your community, from the standards of the institutions that you go to or the community that you decide to land yourself in. And oftentimes you don't have the level of self-confidence or clarity to know, okay, so what am I allowed to pick and choose, and where do I seek other, while legitimate sources of Torah, is not within the confines of our community, if you want to say. So if you could speak to that a little bit about developing that self-confidence and the practical methodology for developing a Torah that is unique to you and not sort of like squishing you into a place that you don't necessarily need to be squished into.
So do I have to do something as difficult as that, or could we try something easier like diffusing the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Something like that, yeah. We could take the easy way out.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you, period, what the balance is. Certainly I couldn't do it even if I knew the answers in the space of a half-hour podcast. I think there are a number of things that are important that at least to begin an answer. One is that people, whether they're Balei Tshuva or not Balei Tshuva, have to make sure that they don't lose their essential selves. There are parts of yourself which are good and put there by design by the Ribono Shalom. They're part of the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted you to be different as an individual. And one of the most tragic things in life is when that inner voice is snuffed out. Now, we don't live life by just living through that inner voice. That's why we have a Torah. We need that outer voice. Shamshon Fall Hirsch says that was the difference between the Nachash, the primordial serpent, and Chava. The Nachash said, hey, I was created by God also, and this tree looks fine to me, no ill effects. And the difference between the Nachash, between the serpent and Chava, and a human being, is that we must listen to the voice, not only the inner voice, but the voice coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah. But that doesn't mean snuffing out that inner voice. When you find that your essential self is really getting quashed, you've got to step back somehow and say, what's going wrong here? This is just not the way the Ribono Shalom wants me to fit in. Number two, you have to find the right people. It's practically impossible to live with the advice and the guidance of everybody around in the Torah world. It's not monochromatic, even though it looks that way at times. And it's not univocal. There are different voices. It's always been that way. And the Torah tolerates that and even advocates it. There's a reason why the 12 Shvatim, the 12 tribes, got separate brachas. Why the Torah emphasized, even though they had the commonality of all leaving Egypt together, why they were then put in a divinely arranged array around the Mishkan, because different groups have different things that they're supposed to accomplish. You've got to find the people in the Torah world. It won't come instantly, and there's no website where you can find it just through the click of a mouse. But you have to find people who are Talmidei Chachamim. You're not going to go off into where people don't know very much about Torah, but people whose Torah learning and Torah experience is beyond cavil, but nonetheless understand you understand them, or the kind of Torah that they're teaching within the Torah world resonates with you. For some people, the Torah of the Satmar Rav is going to work a lot better than Rav Kook. But for the person for whom Rav Kook resonates better than the Satmar Rav, you're probably better off learning a little bit more Ein Ayah than learning Al Hagula Al Hatzmura.
And then once you feel that certain resonance with a certain gadol, because in the cases that you both mentioned, they're not around anymore except in their Sfarim, do you then try to find a rabbi or a community that also reads that? Or how do you kind of balance that out with the reality that, we sometimes can only have relationships with either the rabbi in our community or, now thank God the internet outside of our community, but it's still somewhat limited in terms of what we can access and who has time for us.
Right, so here's where I'm going to start sounding like really dumb, because I can't solve all of the problems. You're correct that your Rebbeim cannot be people who died 50 years ago or even 5 years ago. You do need live Rebbeim and live guidance and mentors. I think that it pays to keep in mind what Rav Kaplan Zatzal once told me. Gemara says in the last parak of Sanhedrin, the Ikvasa the Mashiach Emes Ne'ederes. And it's usually translated as, well, the pasuk means that as we get closer to Mashiach, the passage from the Gemara, as we get closer to Mashiach, Emes will be lacking. But the Gemara says Ne'ederes from the word Eder, which means a flock. It's Nasu Adarim V'holchu Lahem. It'll be split up between different flocks, will all go off in a different direction. Rabbi Kaplan Zatzal suggested that as we get closer to the end, different parts of Torah Emes are not going to be found within the same person, the same community. You will have to have somebody who you really trust implicitly for halacha. That person is not necessarily the person you'll go to for Eitzah, and not necessarily the person you'll go for growth in machshava, or guidance in where do I fit in and what's this all about. You people today more than ever probably need multiple Torah teachers if they're not fortunate enough to find it in one person where everything resonates. But that's okay. That's okay. You can get it from different people. And one of the beautiful things, again, about the internet is that you're not restricted to where you are geographically. We really do live in virtual communities. We live within geographic communities and at Tzibur, where we may have a makom kavua, where we daven and we interact with all the people in that shul, that minyan all the time, but we also have parts of ourselves that are fed and nourished by friends and mentors and even rebbeim that we deal with, we interact with electronically.
That's such a amazing concept that I wish was taught more. And again, I just come through the Bali Tshuva worlds, but the idea of a person essentially taking responsibility, believe it or not, wild concept, for their own life, and then trying to ascertain, what do I need and where, and then going after and getting it, as opposed to just kind of shutting off your mind and following the first person that brought you in the door, so to speak.
Yeah, what a novel idea that one should take responsibility for his or her own life. Yeah. Look, we see the casualties when that doesn't happen. When that doesn't happen, when people don't, it works fine for some people, and for those people, they have no need to do anything else. But for lots of other people, they're crushed in the process. Their children are turned off in the process. Marriages fail because of it. I'm not a great advocate of that.
So something else that's really fascinating for me is that in the world of outreach, and you have a ton more experience than I do, just looking at where college and high school students are versus, when I started my career a little bit over a decade ago, it's in a lot of ways very, very different. And you mentioned that the Maharal and the Slonim are both really sort of applied to this generation. And I was curious if you had any ideas why that specifically works, and if you think that it isn't a process of change now, or if a lot of the ideas are actually just as relevant now as when you started teaching.
Whoa. I would have to split that into two halves. I would say that the Slonim Rebbe, to a large extent, was the Rebbe of the generation and continues on. And through the writings of his son, which are also very, very popular. What made the Rebbe so successful is his honesty and his experience. He had decades and decades of experience with Hasidim, and he didn't pull any punches. He saw what the issues were. And he writes again and again and again about people with issues of emunah, and people whose emunah is cyclical and waxes and wanes. He speaks about people with wrestling with real issues of...
What do you mean cyclical, just to be clear?
That emunah rarely stays at one plane. Gotcha. That there are people who have some better days and worse days, and that didn't even start with Slonim Rebbe. The idea, I think, is in the Zohar that there has to be, you read it, tzarech aliyah, that you can't get to the next madrega until you kind of slip off the one before, are appalled by it, or motivate yourself to scamper back up the mountain to a high position that you were before. But there's a beautiful piece at the beginning of Bamidbar. I remember it's the first parsha of the second, where he talks about Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. I would really urge everybody to take a look at that piece and the avoda, the different avoda of three kinds of people, and what it means practically. I do have a chapter on it in my book.
Good.
How's that for self-promotion? I did one volume on Siva Shalom, and there's another one, hopefully, that'll come out pretty soon.
Who published those?
The first one was self-published. The next volume looks like it'll be Korean.
Awesome. Great. Okay.
Now, for the other Svarim, Maharal would take us a little longer than we have to talk about why I think Maharal is more popular today than when Maharal lived, and even for the next 100 years after. That's complicated, but the Maharal, like some other Svarim, was not popular, half as popular in his lifetime, or even a good while after, until he was sort of discovered and fit the needs of the generation. There are two other works that I think are exactly what you said, more relevant today than when they were written. I believe if they were better understood, they would so enhance the intellectual, the spiritual lives of people, especially those who are trying to confront the wider world out there. Those are Rav Shamshon Hirsch, I'm absolutely positive, is more relevant than when he wrote it, and he did a great...
His commentary on the Torah.
Excuse me?
I'm saying his commentary on the Torah.
The commentary on the Torah, pretty much everything else he wrote as well. It's true of Chorev, it's true of the 19 letters, but certainly the commentary on the Torah, which I think is the best, plus the collected writings, some fantastic essays there. The other one is Rav Kook, who I think one of the tragedies of the generation is that people got so caught up in, well, we don't like his politics, and I don't have a problem with politics as much as others, but even if I did, not to be able to separate the godless of his Torah and his machshava in particular, dealing with the intellectual issues of today, of what modernism is about and what it's like to live in the world and to live part of a world community and with other faiths and with other people, and to still know who you are and why we're different. I think it's tragic that more people are not acquainted with the hashkafa of Rav Kook. Between those two, between Rav Kook and Rav Shamshon Hirsch, people had a great grounding in their thought. I think life would be very different for a lot of thinking people.
It's fascinating. There's so much. I guess I'll make two just short questions. After this very long time in LA and a very productive part of your career, what made you make Aliyah? Why did you move to Israel? Why now? What are you looking to accomplish there that you couldn't do in LA?
Well, one thing that I hope I can do here is make a contribution to the largest community of Jews in the world. I was born after the establishment of the state, but I've lived with a lot of guilt. What have I done for it? I look at the contributions of so many people, but to turn this country into what it is. And like, what was I doing? Like sitting back in the comfort of Los Angeles. I've lived with that kind of guilt, and making the move would assuage it somewhat. I remember years ago when Rabbi Beryl Wine made the move from Muncie. I was considered as a candidate for taking over the school, and I asked him the same question he just asked me. And he made a great argument that most people have to kind of reinvent themselves at some point in their life. And they're better off doing it at the height of their powers. Because otherwise you kind of get old and stale, and you just stick around until they cart you out in a wheelbarrow. And I wasn't ready for that. So I figured this is a way of kind of starting over and trying in a different venue. I'm not starting off entirely fresh. I did take my job with me. So I'm still a full-time employee of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, still keeping that up. But there are 24 hours in the day, and I have a little bit of time, and I hope to do things here that can't do in the States, and hope that I can atone somewhat for the life of comfort. I say that one of there were sort of three people involved in this decision pushing. One was Rabbi Wine, one was Shmuel Kamenetsky, who once one of my sons asked him, "Why am I here still in the United States? I know I could move my business, operate it from Israel. I'm not troubled about the chinuch for the kids. Do I have any excuse to still stay in America?" And Rav Shmuel said, "No." He left and hasn't looked back. And the third was the Chozeh Milublin. Why the Chozeh Milublin? Because the question many of us have had and never asked ourselves or asked others, why is Shalosh Shudas called Shalosh Shudas rather than Sudat Shlishit, depending on where you live? But there are people who call it Shalosh Shudas. So the Chozeh Milublin said, I'll tell you why. Because all of us kind of like to fool ourselves and say, sit down at a well-apportioned meal in the living in the lap of luxury or semi-luxury, and we close our eyes and we say, Shabbos Kodesh, I'm doing this l'shem shamayim. This is all for you, Ribono Shel Olam. And After a while, some of us start to doubt, is it really all for him, or is it covered my stomach? So the Chozeh Milubim says, the first two sudas is very hard to say you're eating it all l'shem shamayim. There are too many distractions. Then you get to Shabbos afternoon. You're stuffed to the gills from 2 large meals you had in the last 15 hours. And you remind yourself, oh, I'm supposed to eat a kazayas for Shalosh Shabbos. Who's interested in eating right now? But you eat it anyway. Why? Because halacha says you should, and the Gemara says you should, so you eat it. He says, now, showing that you can do this l'shem shamayim, that's mala, that raises up the other two as well. I figured I lived in LA in comfort in a great town for close to 40 years. If I can sort of turn my back to all of that, say, Ribbono Shalom, I'm going to the next phase, I'm going to deal without the convenience, I'm going to sit there in the traffic and the bureaucracy and everything, just to show you if I need to do it, I can do it, and I'm doing it for you. Hopefully that will atone for some of my excess in the last 40 years.
There you have it, folks, another inspiring episode. If you enjoyed this, I ask you to please share this with your friends and to like us over on Rabbi Rupp through Facebook or on YouTube. And the more that we're able to get these important messages out, the more that we can really make an impact in the world. So I encourage you, please, to stay tuned. We have a ton of amazing speakers coming up, and also to tell your friends about it. Thank you very much.